Aloha. Good morning. It is good to be here to worship with you. So, in staff meeting on Tuesday, Pastor David taught us a little practice that helps us reset or to get your footing again, particularly if something is confusing or tense. And the practice is called PBS. And I don't mean Portuguese bean soup, which is delicious and may also help you reset and refocus. PBS stands for, I always want to say prayer. It's pause, breathe, smile. And today, as we continue our Unspoken series, we come to a conversation about sexuality. And before we dive in, I think it would be good if we tried a little PBS. Pause, breathe, smile. Would you join me in a moment of prayer? Blessed One, you are the God who is revealed in the simple and the sublime. You're the one who has formed us, who has knit us together. You're the one who is seen in the glories of this day, is heard in the simple voices of forgiveness or the sound of laughter. You're the one who's been speaking over generations upon generations, speaking words of love and call, words of comfort and grace. Holy One, as we go throughout the remainder of this day, as we continue in our worship of you, may our eyes and ears, our heart and our mind, all of our senses, all of who we are, may they be attuned to the movement and the sound of your Spirit. It's in your name we pray. Amen. I have 5 short stories that I'd like to share with you as we start. When I was about 7, I remember visiting my uncle, who at the time was in his mid-20s. And as I went for a visit, he anticipated my coming, and so he pulled out some of his old toys for me to play with. In particular, he had quite a few G.I. Joes. But the G.I. Joes of his childhood were different than the G.I. Joes of mine. The G.I. Joes I knew had these plastic bulging muscles and these grimaced faces. The G.I. Joes of his generation were much bigger than mine. They were like this. In fact, they reminded me more of Barbie dolls, but with poor fashion sense, just all kind of green and these big boots. In fact, I remember bringing one to him and asking him, somewhat accusingly, "You played with dolls when you were a kid?" And he said, "They're not dolls, they're action figures," somewhat defensively. Pause, breathe, smile. After college, I worked a couple of jobs to save money for seminary. My evening job was as a waiter at a local diner. And one early evening, the restaurant was hopping. It was already busy and packed. And I was buzzing around trying to keep all of my tables happy, because if you've ever worked as a server before, you know that the real money is in the tips. Now, there was one of my tables that had 2 mature women who were clearly friends and had been friends for a while. Their laughter was frequent and infectious. And after clearing their plates, I turned away from their table to go, and that's when I felt it. A smack right on my posterior. And then followed by the sound of their laugh. I paused. Did that just happen? Do I laugh that off? Do I tell them that's not okay? Do I smack their hand playfully? How is this going to affect my tip? Pause. Breathe. Smile. It was the big day of a wedding for a friend of mine. I had known this friend and his family and his extended family for many years, and I had the honor to officiate the ceremony. So I got to the church early because I wanted to help set up. And as I was at the church, I noticed the vendors who were buzzing about, trying to get everything ready, flowers and decorations and whatnot. And while I was taking stock of everything that was happening, I noticed my friend, the groom, his mother, sitting apart from the action by herself. I took a seat beside her and I struck up a conversation. Her mood was clearly heavy. She still wasn't sure how to feel about the wedding. She loved her son dearly, but she struggled with the idea that he was about to marry another man. She came from another country, another culture, a place where this didn't happen, or at least it wasn't talked about. And the fact that her son was gay certainly was not talked about in her family. I mean, don't get me wrong, everybody knew it, but you just didn't speak of it. Now with the wedding, it became public. There was no more hiding or pretending that the man that he lived with for years was just a really good friend he had known for a long time. She had heard from family who said they disapproved and who pledged not to come. And her heart felt torn. Yet as we talked, some of the guests began to arrive early. And she noticed that some were her family. Some came to help set up. One, her brother, who said he wasn't going to come, brought his cello because he was going to play for the prelude and during the service. And one by one, as they began to pour in, she pointed out some of them, saying, "Oh, they said they weren't coming." Or they said they were really angry or frustrated about this, but they kept coming. And soon the conversation turned from those who weren't going to come to those who showed up. And they didn't come to disrupt, but to be with this mother and her family, because she was their friend, their sister, and they loved her, and they loved her children. Pause. Breathe. Smile. At a former parish where I used to work, I served with a senior minister who was energetic and honest, encouraging and direct. This reverend had decades of experience as a parish pastor, held a master's degree in social work as well as several other advanced degrees in theology and pastoral counseling and care. This pastor was great at hospital, at home visits, at being with people in a time of need, at praying with others. One day, the parish nurse came into my office and asked me to visit a parishioner in the congregation. This parishioner was at home and wanted a minister to come by and pray with them. I was a bit confused, though, because I know the senior minister had already scheduled a time to be with this parishioner, that there was already something set up for them to meet so the senior minister could pray with them. Curious and concerned, I asked why I was being asked to now go. "Well," the parish nurse said sheepishly, because the senior minister is a woman. And even though the parishioner likes the senior pastor, this parishioner was raised to believe that only men could be ministers." Pause. Breathe. Smile. One Sunday at church, the youth group that I was a part of went sideways. The youth Sunday school teacher who was normally there wasn't there that day, and so we had a substitute. And you know how things are when you have a substitute teacher. Things are a little different. And this particular substitute had been in the church for a long time, a young man who was recently married and just really recently had become a new father. And right away he set the tone by telling the dozen or so of us that were there that he wasn't going to teach the lesson that had been left for him. He had a different idea. He passed out Post-it notes and told us all to write down anonymously our questions about sex. Immediately, my mind began to race. What? Doesn't he know this is a church? I don't think we're allowed to say that word, much less have questions about it, much less have a conversation about it. Maybe this is a trap. Maybe he's trying to trick us to get us to reveal who the immoral among us are. But then I thought, this may be the only chance I get to ask an adult about sex without judgment or embarrassment or fear. So I quickly wrote my question, folded it up, and threw it in the box as fast as I could. Paused. Breathe. Smile. Which of these stories is about sexuality? The kids' toys, the posterior pat, the wedding family, the desire for a manister, the question box. Sexuality encompasses nearly every aspect of our being, from attitudes and values to feelings and experiences. It's in that adolescence questions, and I think if we're frank, it's not just adolescents. All of us at every age, I think, have some questions of one form or another about sexuality. It's in gender politics and discrimination. It's a part of family dynamics like those seen at that wedding. It's in the unsolicited slap and the gender roles revealed in toys. Sexuality runs the full gamut of our whole life. Our sexuality doesn't end at a certain age, and there's no surgery that has the power to take away our sexuality. Like our spirituality, our emotions, our capacity for goodness, or any other characteristic that makes us human, it's a part of who we are, from end to beginning. I mean, think of it. What's one of the questions that we commonly ask a woman who's pregnant? Is it a boy or a girl? It's an innocent question with so much attached to it. From cultural attitudes about men and women, to family expectations and hopes, to the kinds of clothes or colors that are given to adorn the child, to the name that's chosen for them. I don't know if I've ever met a man whose name means beautiful spring flower. Our beliefs about gender identity immediately begin to have an impact on this new life. And I'll be frank, the conversation about gender identity, about what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman, is particularly close to my heart. Having 2 little ones, I'm acutely aware and attuned and wondering about the lessons that they're learning about what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman from superheroes or cartoons or well-intentioned relatives or even myself, and the uninvestigated assumptions I carry about masculinity and femininity. It's a massive topic, and yet it is only one strand of sexuality. Flirting, harassment, body image, trust, friendships, anatomy, orientation, and the occasional need for a simple hug, all of it is sexuality. And I haven't even mentioned reproduction. Yet conversations about sexuality are often reduced to conversations about sexual behavior. When we say the word sex, people often think of only one thing. And at that point, it's all too easy for the topic to become either taboo or a punchline. But sexuality is not something to be hidden or feared or ashamed of. Sexuality is to be questioned and explored, respected and protected. It is nuanced, complex, confusing, and perhaps most of all, it is blessed. In Genesis 1, the reading that we heard, the first thing that we learn about humanity is that we're created in the image of God. Over millennia, volumes have been written and discussed about what this imago Dei means and how it plays out in our life. And yet I'm convinced that beneath all those layers of meaning, somewhere at the core of what it means, is simply that by the grace of God, we share in the goodness of God. And God saw everything that God had made, and indeed, it was very good. The second thing that we learn about humanity in this passage relates to sexuality. Male and female, God created them. And God saw everything that God had made, and indeed, it was very good. Our sexuality is part of the blessing. It is covered by this proclamation of goodness. And while every day there are examples of the ways some in society have damaged human sexuality by violence or by exploitation, by dishonesty or abuse of power, these curses are not more powerful than the blessing. They are not more powerful than the truth that our desire for intimacy, our gender expression, our care and enjoyment of others, our body in its fullness is a good gift from a loving God. For us as followers of Christ, the divine made flesh. This is where a healthy sexuality begins, with the conviction that sexuality is not sinful, it's not even neutral, it's sacred. This is reinforced through Scripture's positive portrayal of sexuality. You hear it in the Song of Songs as lovers call out to each other saying, "The voice of my beloved, look, my beloved comes leaping upon the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved speaks and says to me, arise, my love, my fair one, come away, for now the winter is past, for now the rain is gone." You hear it in the imagery used to describe the relationship between Creator and creation in the book of Hosea, when God says, "I will betroth you to me forever. I will marry you in righteousness and in justice, in love and compassion. I will be with you and betroth you in faithfulness, and you will know me." Our sexuality is intertwined with our spirituality, for both are rooted in relationship. Both require an openness to being deeply affected by someone other than oneself. Both benefit from a space to breathe, a healthy distance from the busyness and exhaustion of the daily grind. Both speak of our inherent self-worth and call us to treat others with respect and inclusivity. A healthy spirituality is interwoven with a healthy sexuality. So what does it mean to have a healthy sexuality? What does that look like? Well, earlier this week, I was honored to take part in a worship service that was based upon sexuality and gender. It was a service marking the transition in gender. I saw a healthy sexuality being played out as testimony from one follower of Christ was given as he shared his struggle with gender norms, as he spoke of the abuse that he survived as a child, and he talked about the journey of discovery that he had made with God about his identity. I saw a healthy sexuality played out as a community of family and friends and mentors and supporters came to celebrate the strength and beauty seen in this man. I saw healthy sexuality as praise and thanksgiving to God was offered for God's faithfulness as we marked the end of a transition and the claiming of a new life for this transgender man. There were a lot of moments from that service that I remembered. The heartfelt gifts given that affirmed his identity. The moment when those who were in attendance all gathered around him and laid their hands upon him to ask for God's blessing upon him, a prayer of God's presence and guidance. And the personal testimony full of vulnerability and truth, and an invitation to understand the heart of another. But I think one of the memories that I'll keep with me from that service was of something that did not happen. There was no blaming of God, as if God had initially got the gender wrong. There was no shaming, even as past injustices were named and called out. The conversation turned to gratitude for the ways that grace and healing came to life through friends and through faith. A healthy sexuality doesn't begin and end with sexual behavior. A healthy sexuality is measured by honesty and trust, by vulnerability and authenticity. A healthy sexuality is a wholehearted opening of oneself to God and to others in a way that seeks to share in grace and forgiveness, respect and love. A healthy sexuality pursues understanding and intimacy with others. It calls out behavior that devalues the imago Dei in another. It honors the boundaries of others, and it communicates feelings in appropriate ways. Several years ago, myself and some other adults led a faith and sexuality curriculum for some middle schoolers at our church. And it's an ongoing program over several weeks, and one of the aspects of it was a box that we asked people to put their questions in. I wonder where I got that idea. And so youth would put their anonymous questions in the box, and we'd read them and then discuss them the next week. I remember one question came from a young boy who said, "How do I get girls to like me?" We discussed first just the authenticity of that question, the commonality of the desire to be cared for by another, to be attractive to somebody else, to be in relationship with those around us, to care for and to be cared for by another. And then we spoke about how a healthy sexuality isn't really about trying to get everyone from the opposite sex or the sex you're attracted to be interested in you. It's not about being some sort of Don Juan. And as far as a healthy sexuality is concerned, there's really just 3 hearts you need to be concerned with. The heart of God, who created you and loves you fully. Your own heart, full of its desires and questions, its longings. And the heart of a beloved, the one that makes your heart sing. Seek to understand these 3. We shared this with the boy, not just with him, but with the entire class, because the church believed that having honest conversations about faith and sexuality was crucial. Friends, we have a responsibility as people of faith to be vocal and visible in this arena of life. We know the brokenness of our world when it comes to sexuality. We hear the stories of sexual discrimination, of stories of sex trafficking, of gender inequality and harassment. We know the brokenness of our world when it comes to sexuality, because I'm sure many, if not all of us, have our own stories of bumps and bruises and wounds that we carry in regards to this area. And to those who carry such burdens, and to all of us, let me say again one last time, the curses you've survived are not more powerful than the blessings that you've been given. That your body and spirit, your flesh and bones, your soul and your mind, your sexuality is a good gift from a loving God. It is a gift that we have as people of faith to share good news about. It is one more way that God reveals God's self. It's a gift we're meant to enjoy and give thanks to God for. Church, simply put, human sexuality is too important and too wonderful of a gift to be left unspoken by communities of faith. And I know, trust me, I know, that talking about sexuality isn't easy. And so I say, pause, breathe, and smile. Because the God in whose image you are created loves you, frees you, and guides you. Amen.